Welcome to the Dragon's Den. I'm your venerable host Orochi, and today we're going to be talking about The Dragon's Call by Peter Dressler. I have some very mixed feelings about this. I think it starts off really interesting, gets weird as shit, but then ends very cerebral, very thought-provoking. So I would say this is a maybe read if you like dragons in the modern world, because this book basically starts off in the 90s, maybe late 90s, early 2000s. And it's about a guy who walks in the woods, doesn't have much connection to anybody, that typical wandering around aimlessly because your life's going nowhere kind of thing. And he comes across a dragon. And things get weird from there. Because this dragon is 100% not benevolent in any way, shape, or form. And so that's the initial premise and where everything starts. So if you like modern-ish day stuff with heavy fantasy themes, specifically trying to explore not precisely what it means to be human, but what it means to lose your humanity and become something else, and the things that might do to you, and the preparation one might have for accepting such a burden, then I would say this might be for you. But big problem is after the first chapter, the introduction and him meeting the dragon, and he gets captured, almost eaten, and then it comes to the dragon basically tells him, it's you can have a choice. I can either eat you when you die because you can't go back, because nobody can tell anybody about why that I exist, which is reasonable, ish. Or, and this is where it kind of turns a little fucking weird fetishy, is that it's basically a combination of vor and unbirthing, where it's the dragon eats you and then hatches you out as a baby dragon, which is fucking weird. It's an interesting idea, but man, is it fucking weird. So if you can get over that extremely weird aspect, and it does kind of get descriptive only once or twice about the vor stuff, but it is in there. And so you might have to, like me, just start skipping paragraphs at a time, because it's didn't need to, it's fucking weird shit. But if you can get through that, then I would say, this was a decent read. The ending was, I loved the ending. The ending was very interesting. And I'll get to that in my spoiler section. But that is my short intro to it. What you might like. It's decent. I wouldn't say it's fantastic. It's very, 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 very short. Like, I almost read it in one sitting. But, that's like as a 6 to 10 hour sitting. So, it may or may not be the thing that you are looking for. But it was all right. I don't give numbers or anything here, but it was pretty good. It gets much better later on because it starts actually bringing up, it doesn't really address them in any way, but it definitely brings up like topics that are good for discussion. Like this book kind of brings up things where I definitely think people who read this book could find other people who have read it and just have a lot of different things to talk about and think on, which I think is really cool. Even if this story maybe didn't address any of them, it still kind of presents these questions. It's like, what if? And that, like, through the story, the main character is kind of like, this is how it turned out for me. It could have been different. Things could have definitely been different. Maybe. I'm unsure. I just know that this is how things went for me, and it was kind of a roller coaster, which is very cool. So, all right, on to the spoilery stuff. After the first chapter, once it starts getting into, the whole suggestion of, oh, I can eat you and turn you into a dragon if that's something you want, but you have to really, really, really want it. And it's like, I was immediately just like, oh, man, because that happens just like the second chapter or whatever. So it's right after you set in, and then I was immediately like, God damn it, if this going to be like a fetish book, that's going to piss me off so much. But it was just a start because, the main character is kind of like, a super dragon nerd and all this stuff and doesn't get along with people very well. So, like, the perfect candidate kind of stuff, right? And even then, the dragon named Sam just kind of, how would I put this? It's kind of like training somebody, testing them over and over and over again, putting them in all of these really messed up situations to see how they would react to things. And later on, once the main character, Patrick, looks back on it, he was just like, oh yeah, from start to finish, this was 100% manipulation. Every second of this was manipulation. None of it was by chance. None of it was random. It was all 100% manipulation. But at the time, it was kind of like, oh, dragon tried to eat him and he was just begging for his life. And it's the kind of thing where dragons are telepathic. And so she, and the protagonist even says, the dragons are genderless, but since they can lay an egg, he just says she because that's kind of like just the closest connection he can make, even though any dragon could have been a man or woman, which is really some messed up shit. But he begs for his life, and the whole beginning of their meeting is all about the fact that only people who have gotten to a point where they can accept that a dragon is not an animal can actually hear them telepathically, which is rather interesting because there's just so many things about that kind of tell you is like, oh, well, even if, you saw one of these things, you wouldn't recognize that it's an intelligent creature because it could not communicate with you, which is very interesting. I like that quite a bit. But he rather quickly was able to hear her, which is sort of the hallmark of the first step towards being capable of going through the transformation. But then she asks him over and over and over and over and over again. It's like, well, this is an option for you, but do you really want it? And the first part is just like, okay, he says yes, but that doesn't really mean anything. Because it's not saying, especially when it's like, do this or you die, it's you need to want this and everything that it entails. So then she tests him to see if he's going to actually stay put and not run away. She tests him with hunting and killing things and eating things, and then eventually killing humans and all of this shit, and just trying to really pressure from every angle to make him decide that death is better than this option, because I would have to be okay with all of this shit. And he's like, I'm not okay with some of it, but I think it would be worth it because I could just avoid these situations that are the things that I don't want. I wouldn't have to kill people because I would just avoid people. And I really want to fly because that is amazing, and just live a natural life as a dragon. And even the final part where, like, she's arguing with him and he's kind of arguing back, and because he had such a visceral reaction when she lured people in to kill them in front of him, she was immediately just like, no, you can't handle this. Tell me you can't handle this. Just admit it, because he runs off and pukes. Because she lures in a man and his, like, 8-year-old daughter. And so that whole situation is kind of just like, you know where it's going, even if Patrick doesn't really pick up on it quick enough, because he's just desperately trying to, we can find a way to save them. But that was never on the table. And as the story continues to go, and it keeps revealing more and more that, yeah, nothing was ever on the table. It was either death or transformation. Always. Nothing else in anything else was ever an option. It was all manipulation. But so they get into a fight where she's just trying to get him to back down from it. And so she bites his ear off, because she said one of the things that needs to be is you need to be whole and healthy for this to happen. So then she's like, there, I've just damaged you. Now your chances of going through this are slim to none. Do you still want it? And he's just like, he's pissed. But he's just like, yes, I fucking want this. I've already been through all this shit already. I want this. And so then she just stands there, and he has to force himself. And this is where it gets fucking, like, you might need to skip some of it if you read this, is that he has to pry open her mouth and crawl himself in. And it is descriptive of every part of that, the journey in and the journey down. And the after effects there, it describes all of that. And, oh, God. I skipped a lot of it, and it was kind of like, I wish I skipped more, because, damn, that shit's weird. But then he's successful, and they live together. He's reborn. For the first year of life, he doesn't have any of his memories, but then eventually remembers everything, and they get along. She helps him grow, and then after while, once Pat starts learning to fly, Sam lures some more humans in. And Pat's immediately like, why are you doing this? And Sam was just like, because you need to learn about eating humans. It is the most amazing thing ever. Humans are our natural food source. And when you do eat them, you will understand and you will not go back. And he's like, no, no, no. And so he struggles yet again to try and save these two teenagers, but ultimately fails, and they both die. But this has progressed from like 2000 to like 2008 or something, from when he had a flip phone. So he was like, oh, that's okay. But these kids had smartphones, which have GPS on them. So the next day, several cops show up. And that doesn't go well because they both get shot and Sam dies. And that's kind of like, Sam had even said that they had gone 200 years without a companion, and this existence was crushingly lonely. And now Pat's in that situation where, oh, I'm all by myself now, but what the fuck do I do? I can't leave these two dead cops and this dragon body here. So he eats the cops, and then suddenly he's just like, holy shit, this is the most delicious thing I've ever had. I hate myself. I hate this. Why the fuck would this be how it is? But then also learns that eating humans supercharges his fire breath. So then he was able to actually incinerate Sam's corpse and clear their whole cave of any evidence of what happened. And then tries to leave. And there's a whole bunch of cops show up, and people start taking evidence and stuff. It's a crime scene. And he's just watching, and he's just like, I have no idea what to fucking do now. There was so much more for me to learn, and now I'm all by myself with no one to teach me or guide me. And, like, what the fuck do I do? And I forget what it was, but something kind of triggers him, and he goes on into a rage and flies into the town and kills a bunch of people, and then kidnaps a woman and does the whole spiel of, oh, well, you don't have to die, you could become a dragon, blah 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 blah. And they, just say, well, I guess that's better than dying. And so he goes through all of that, turns them into a dragon, and they're immediately like, I hate you for doing this to me. When I grow up, I'm going to kill you. And he's just like, well, they'll grow out of that. And then eventually, once they learn to fly, they were like, I'm done with you. I'm going to kill you. But first, I'm going to go and find my parents. Find my family. And he's just like, oh, you can't do that. And he's like, well, what are you going to do to stop me? And so Pat eventually breaks down and kills them, and kind of comes to this realization that, oh, this is why Sam made sure 100% that this was desperately what I wanted, so that this sort of a situation didn't happen. And that kind of fucks Pat up quite a bit. Because then the book basically gets into this extended, oh, the next decade happened and a couple things happen. And it's very interesting because Pat's doing telling the story in hindsight. And so it's kind of like, at some point, even at the beginning, because of the perspective, that Pat survives all this because they're telling the story. And then near the end, you got to think, oh, well, they got to be telling the story, probably, like, who are they going to be telling the story to, right? It's either going to be another one of their children that they create, or a potential prospect for that. Those can kind of only be the options at that point. But once Pat tells the whole story of what they were doing and stuff, then they kind of go back and amend it. And it's like, so that's my whole story. And then it gets into, and do you still want this? You still want to be here? Blah, 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 blah. The manipulation. And then he goes back and he says, but that's not the whole story. I've actually been rather busy the last 10 years, and you should probably hear the dark side of the story as well. And then kind of brings up how everything Sam did was manipulation from the start, because Sam taught him the dragon's call, which is a sound dragons can make that targets people and they subconsciously just go towards its source. So all these people that came in, including himself, were called there by Sam. And he was also like, how many people did you hunt and kill while I've been here? And she was like, not too many. But you can't stop once you go. And so after having eaten the cops, Sam eventually, after his first attempt at making a companion fails, he kind of goes crazy and gives into that, and he starts eating people constantly. Like, he said, I settled down next to this big town, and I started taking people off like once a week, a couple times a week, got to once a day. And there was a time when maybe the highest amount in a single day I would eat is like 20 people. And it's like, holy fucking shit, that's nuts. And he says, he got to the point where he was sort of experimenting, and he tried to do the thing that Sam did. Sam's mother died because Sam let a child go. And that brought people to hunt them down. So Pat lets this teenager go for doesn't really explain why, because they had already kind of noted that this isn't the kind of person who would ever be up for this thing, but let them go anyway. And that person, the teenager, told a bunch of people, and then everybody in the town started to know, and that's where Pat learns of something Sam never told him, something fundamental to how dragons operate with humans, is that they can sense fear, and it empowers them. So having a whole town filled with people afraid of them made him strong. And before they could mount some sort of, get the military involved or mount their own raid or whatever to kill him, he went, set the whole town on fire, put the woods around the town on fire, and then went in and just ate as many people as he could shove in his mouth. Like, just goes down this whole bit. Because at first he was just like, I would never eat anybody. I would never eat people. And then after he did, he's like, I'm never going to do that again. That was just an extenuating circumstance. I would never want to deprive somebody of their life. And then after several years, he's just like, yeah. And then I kind of stopped caring about people at all, because they were just tasty. It's like, sure, I was ending their lives, but it just really didn't matter at that point. And so, like, that whole section of the story is, I think, a great, like, psychological theory, right? There's so much you could talk about there. Like, would that actually happen? If you live long enough, do you automatically become callous to things? Yada, yada, yada. Then after telling that side story, goes into this long tangent of, but you're still thinking about doing the process, aren't you? After knowing all of this, you're still thinking about it. And then as it's going through the... I guess prologue, really? But the whole end of the book, he's done telling his story and he's still talking to someone. And then it does a fantastic fourth wall break, which I saw coming, but as soon as it did it, I was so happy. I was like, yes, this is exactly where it was going, and it's so good. Because then, it starts going, you're thinking about this choice. You're thinking about going and collecting these things you would need to do the ritual. You're thinking about it as you read this. And you can't put the story down because you want to know, could I do this? I loved that. It was so good. That part was just such a, oh, yes. So fantastic. It was written so well. Just the slide in from sounding like it's talking to another character in the book to being a fourth wall break. And it was so good because then it becomes this message. It's just like, most people don't believe. Even if you tell other people, they don't believe. And it's also, you're not my second. Not even close. I've had dozens of children in the last decade. And even some of them have started having children of their own. And I found some of Sam's siblings as well, because they had 14. And we're all increasing our number. And eventually, something's going to happen. The balance of power is going to have to change. Because we're going to run out of room. And humans are just destroying the planet. So they need to be culled. Because there are too many humans. The end was so good. Like, I would say, even if you don't like the rest of the book, that ending is so interesting that I think getting through the rest of it is worth it. So, yeah. There's still lots of details. If you want to go out and read it, it's a rather quick read, so I would suggest if you like cerebral stuff, something that's going to give you a lot of interesting things to think about and do that nice little twist, then yeah, pick this up. It was pretty good. It wasn't fantastic or anything, but it was pretty good. I liked it. And it's weird because the afterwards is just kind of like the actual author talking to you and just being like, because of the font and changes and stuff, I ended up with a couple extra pages, so I just kind of put this stuff here, and it kind of tries to gaslight some because it starts going into, the history of dragons in all the different human cultures, and then it starts saying, I've seen and talked to dragons, and they're out there, and all this kind of stuff. So, just sort of working hard to re-imprint that the end of the book of the dragon talking to the reader as a sort of, because it even says it at one point that Pat is kind of just like, and if this sounds like a recruitment speech, then, well, it is, because we're getting stronger. We're getting more numerous. And the authors afterward is kind of just there to reinforce that with this, like, yeah, there's dragons, you would never be able to notice them or see them unless they wanted you to notice or see them, but they're out there. And that was super weird, but it was kind of cool. I could have done without it, but it was all right. But yeah, that's The Dragon's Call, a very interesting like thought experiment with a lot of interesting ideas in it that it just presents as questions. It doesn't really seek to answer any of them. It just presents a whole bunch of interesting questions, which I really like, because the answer is going to be different for different people. So that's really super cool. But that is all for now. Have a great evening.
Everybody's got their